Welcome to the Lost Ways of Knowing podcast. Your host is Matthew Krebs, religious scholar, philosopher, and co-founder of Circle Yoga Shala. The Lost Ways of Knowing teaches a basic history of the Indian traditions that are central to modern yoga. If you're a yoga teacher or practitioner, you must listen for a clear, concise, and provocative engagement with how this history might apply to today's world. The ultimate aim of this podcast is to initiate a dialogue about awakening and overcoming self-deception, leading to deeper intimacy with what is real. Matthew's coming to you from his home, Circle Yoga Shala, which is also a working farm and yoga teacher, yoga therapy training facility.
Welcome, everyone. This episode begins the discussion that we're having on the importance of meaning in human life. And I should be specific about this. We're not really talking about the meaning of life, which is a subject that certainly is beyond my individual ability to comment on in any specific or real way. But we're talking really about meaning in life. So what does that mean? We're talking about this sense that undergirds our lives that makes us feel like it's worth living in the face of ever-present foolishness, the petty frustrations of life, the failure to realize our ultimate values in any final sense. And of course, there is the looming specter of death or mortality that constantly confronts us. Despite the reality of these existential problems, we do manage to get up out of bed each day and move forward in our lives and to realize some sense of connection. And so meaning is the general term that we would give to that sense, to that power that underlies our lives. Let me offer another analogy. Meaning could be considered like the relationship between the words and the syntax in a sentence. So the words and the syntax all hang together in a way that allows the whole sentence to cohere such that meaningful or relevant information is conveyed, and even such that something like truth is possible from saying or hearing that sentence. So similarly, like the words and the syntax in the sentence, in the experience of meaning for a human being, there's something about how my life and my understanding of the world hang together so that I feel like me or I and the world are really deeply connected, such that what is relevant, meaningful, or real is revealed to me. So meaning is experienced when we feel like we're in contact with the real and the relevant. But not only that, let me drill down a little bit further. When we are well fitted to what is real and relevant, when our posture or our shape is correct, such that the real is like a glove and we are like a hand fitted into that glove. So these are some preliminary ideas. We're going to drill down even further as we go through the episode. But let me leave us in this initial foray with two questions that are very important as contemplative tools when we're thinking about something like meaning and realness. So number one, what would you want to continue to exist? Even if you didn't exist, what would you want to go on long after you're gone? And number two, what is it you're doing in your life right now that contributes to that happening? So the yoga tradition would say that our need for meaning and for this well-fitted contact or intimacy with what is real, it derives from our nature. And the tradition says that our nature is complex in certain ways. It's multi-layered. We're going to leave a lot of that aside and talk about the deepest layer of our nature, what we at the Shala generally call essence. Well, let's connect this to meaning. Our need for meaning and intimacy with the real derives from this deep essence. It derives from what we are at our deepest core. Today I'm going to offer an ancient understanding of what we are at our deepest level. And I'm going to contrast this with modern ideas about what we are, these things that we've been taught. And educated in, and I'm going to argue that many of these modern ideas are mistaken, or if not totally mistaken, they are dangerously reductive, dangerously simplistic. They leave out essential features of what a human being is at the deepest level. Well, this idea of essence derives from the late Vedic period, from a source that we call the Upanishad, and specifically from the Taittiriya Upanishad. In that sacred scripture, we find this idea of the Pancha Maya. Pancha means five, and Maya sometimes is translated by illusion, sometimes it's translated as layer or veil. In more modern translations, it's translated as kosha or sack or covering. I also want you to understand that it means something like power, an all-pervading power, something that goes everywhere with ease. So there are five of these layers. I'm going to leave out four of them so we can hone in on the deepest one, the one that is closest to what we actually are. And that one is called Ananda Maya, because Ananda means bliss. You might translate it as the body of bliss that pervades everywhere with ease. This body of bliss which faintly veils our truest self, which would be called Atman, or the soul. So bliss really is what is closest to what is original about us. Let's unpack this a little bit. So our word bliss comes from several sources depending on how far back you go, but if we start with Old English, bliss means merriment, it means happiness, it means grace, and it means favor. In early Germanic, also in Old Saxon, bliss means gentle and kind. So basically we have this notion of happiness, of grace, of gentleness. You might say spiritual joy, perfect felicity. But I want to make another connection here. Though etymologically bliss is not directly related to this concept I'm going to bring in now, our use of bliss is deeply influenced by the word bless and all of the connotations that this notion of bless or to bless or blessing carries. This suggests that the activity that suits our deepest nature is something like blessing. What does this tell us? To bless means to consecrate via religious rite, to make holy, and also to give thanks. So in this vein, Anandamaya is directly connected to our sense of sacredness and ritual worship. If we put all this together, our essence is not only happiness, gentleness, and joy, it carries a sense of worship and ritual. So to be blissful is an activity that is part repetition, as in worship and ritual, and part recognizing, receiving, and bestowing the value of sacredness on our experience and our lives. If we were to think about this in terms of our development or what kind of education we might need, you might say that because of this essence, we ritually represent and remember our experience in the mode of thankful praising as a means of coming to understand what is meaningful and real in life. You might, in this vein, call us the liturgical animal or the worshiping animal. In order to provide images for our imagination about this subtle essence, this subtle blissful activity of blessing, we use several ideas at the Shala when we're talking about it with our students. We say that our essence is porous, flexible, and mirror-like or transparent. So we have this essence that allows things to pass through it, but also keeps some things. This essence that we have is flexible. It can conform itself to our experience. It is capable of taking the shape of what happens to us and what we come into contact with. And then as mirror-like, it can represent what we've been in contact with. It can remember in a way and show that experience that it has encountered. There's a word for all of this called mimetic, And so we often say that in our deepest essence, we are mimetic here at the Shala. We learn through imitation and contact. So if at our core we are this active remembrance and representation of experience in the spirit of thankful praising, then we can say that we're not primarily thinking things as modernity and its education systems would have it. We are rather embodied, imaginative, effective actors, desiring to be in relationship with what is meaningful and what is real, and moving liturgically in order to accomplish this. So ultimately, we're effective, embodied creatures driven by something like love. It kind of seems like our teachers in school got it wrong if we take that standpoint. Let's linger on this mistake just a little bit. In the modern conception of the human being, we get this idea that we're thinking creatures. Very often, if you look back in history, you find selective readings of Aristotle's statement that man is the rational, the quote-unquote rational animal. And in part, he does mean thinking, but the modern conception of rationality has been reduced to something like logical management of propositions in argumentation. And if you come forward just a little bit in philosophical history, you reach this really important figure named René Descartes and his philosophy. So Descartes divided existence into two ontological categories, one of them called res extensa in Latin, and the other one called res cogitans. So this means that reality is composed of an extended substance, which we have basically begun to call matter, something that is mind independent, something that exists whether it is perceived or not. And then there is the thinking substance, the res cogitans. So he ultimately derived his famous statement, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, from this ontological bifurcation. Really, Descartes tried to ground knowledge and ultimately science in something that was trustworthy, something that was apart from our ability to be deceived. And so he doubted everything he could possibly doubt. And he created as many scenarios as possible to try to get to the bottom level. And what he ultimately arrived at was no matter what he did, he couldn't doubt that he was doubting. So he associated this doubting with thinking and ultimately said, I think, therefore I am. Descartes' ideas are very important for the scientific enlightenment and for the education systems that were founded on it. These ideas hinge around this notion that at our base, at our deepest level, we're thinking creatures. Because it assumed this, our education proceeded as if we could arrive at truth, meaning, therefore, and realness if we are in possession of clear and distinct ideas and the propositions that we can make that follow from those clear and distinct ideas. And so our teachers in school got busy filling us up with facts and ideas and concepts. And they figured if we just had these clear facts and lists of concepts that we would know what to care about, we would know how to act. This approach, however, does not take into account that we are effective, embodied, actively desiring, ritualistic, mimetic creatures. That kind of explains why we could spend so many years in school and remain untransformed existentially at our deepest level. And you can see that education really has proceeded to go in this way in the modern world. Namely, art class is de-emphasized. Home economics, where we learn to cook and smell, therefore, and taste and do things with our hands, has been de-emphasized or removed from school. Shop class, where we learn to build and create, has been de-emphasized. Physical education, where we move our bodies in various ways, where we have to take on many, many shapes and we're stressed at that particular level. Those things have been de-emphasized. But mathematics has not been de-emphasized. This very heady discipline in science and computer science and those kinds of things. And those are important. I'm not against those, but they're not enough to touch what we are at the deepest level. They can't touch our liturgical nature, our valuing, affective, imaginative nature. So if we're going to experience meaning and we're going to realize realness, these endeavors are not or cannot be propositional matters for us. We need more than information. We need more than ideas. We need more than concepts and formulas. These things in themselves really won't constitute knowledge. For a liturgical animal that is actively remembering and representing experience in the spirit of thankful praising, knowledge is transformation of our form. Knowledge is conformity with what is real. And that means the experience of transformation and self-transcendence that come along with these events is absolutely necessary for us to learn and to know. If this is the case, we have to literally be transformed such that our mundane habitual states are transcended, such that we experience transcendence of our everyday selves. And then we can come to know the things that we most deeply desire. Yoga, writ large, is the discipline that understands and stewards this kind of formation of the human being based on the assumption that our essence is blissful and ritualistic and desire-driven. It seems like we've been caught for a while then in competing epistemologies. The modern conception of human essence as a thinking thing or as thinking oriented really has enslaved us in a representational epistemology. To know something is to have a clear and distinct idea or concept of it, quote unquote, in my head, and then to be able to say true statements about that. But if the ancient understanding of essence as entailing embodied action and manifesting ritual praise and remembering is right, we need something like a contact epistemology or a conformity epistemology. We only know something truly when we are transformed, when we are literally conformed to it, when we are shaped more closely like what is real via the right posture and the right relationship with it, so that we ultimately can obtain an optimal grip or get a hold of what is relevant in our experience. These two ideas really couldn't be more different, and this podcast is really about how we might embody these ancient ideas about what our essence is through the practice of yoga. So if we've been caught and enslaved in this representational thinking-oriented paradigm, this explains why it might be more and more difficult today to experience meaning, to realize realness. Basically, we've been schooled in a reductive paradigm with regard to what our nature actually is. And we can see this if we look around. There are specific problems that have to do with experiencing meaning in our existence and coming into contact with what is real. So in the yoga tradition, this notion of Anandamaya, of our essence as bliss and blessing, as we've tried to make the case, this level of our nature has a metabolic function. So Anandamaya digests, if you will, certain aspects of experience. And the tradition has taught us that it digests will and joy. And so you can actually be sick at the level of your will, and you can be sick at the level of your joy. That means certain problems show up. And these problems actually show up as right action and right relationship, which are indications that something is wrong at the level of will, we cannot do correctly. They also show up as problems with respect to caring or valuing, which is this joy or bliss aspect, which I've been trying to relate to meaning in the sense of realness and purpose. So in the modern world, it's increasingly more difficult to understand what it is I should be doing because I don't know what I should be caring about, because I've been educated as a thinking creature that needs to have clear and distinct ideas rather than an embodied, imaginative, effective actor that finds out what is real and meaningful at the deepest level by coming into contact with it and fitting myself to it. like a hand in a glove. St. Augustine would call this scenario where we are experiencing disordered loves. The modern world is constantly saying, what is it you want? Just ask yourself what you want. As if there is no ignorance, as if I have unfettered access to my deepest self, as if I've been educated correctly in relation to my nature. This kind of assumes that having things will alleviate our suffering, and that's perfect for the kind of economy, consumer-based idea of what a human is. But the ancient traditions, and yoga in particular, suggest that we start with inquiries that arise from knowledge of our essential nature, in this case as bliss and blessing. And so if we were going to ask ourselves questions to try to get to the bottom of our suffering, rather than asking immediately what it is that we want, we should be asking things like, what is it I'm identifying with? What is it that is continually filling my awareness? What is it that I'm acting like I desire? What am I beholding? Is there anything calling me forward into transformation and transcendence? How am I seeing deeply into reality, such that I am able to transcend my current state and change my shape, so that I can become more deeply fitted to what is real? Yoga, as a contemplative, wisdom-based tradition, says that we'll experience these kinds of problems, mistaking our having needs for our being needs or our transformational, self-transcending needs by seeing certain kinds of symptoms in our lives continuously. How will we know that we're not proceeding in the way that we should be? Number one, excessive physical tension that is inappropriate to the context that we find ourselves in, a kind of restlessness and hardness at the level of the body that is unnecessary. Number two, inappropriate emotional reaction or response relative to the context that we find ourselves in. And I'm not surprised that one of the most common words you hear is of being triggered by the things that are going on. And last, excessive thought, inappropriate amounts of internal dialogue, thinking that is not about, for instance, what we're doing or what is actually happening, but is about something not going on in the moment. So the body and the heart and the mind are excessive in their activities, and these are symptoms of proceeding with inappropriate methods and an incorrect understanding of what our essence is and what we are. We can't do because we don't really know what we should be caring about. And all of these things really degrade our relationships. And as my teacher, constantly taught us, yoga is about relationship. It's a relationship between two things. It's a harmonious adjustment. It's the kind of relationship that is well fitted, that is right, so we're not misadjusted in the context that we find ourselves in. So let's make a summary. We need meaning and contact with what is real, just like we need air and water and food, and especially love. This need derives from our essential nature as embodied actors, effective actors, motivated by desire for intimacy with what is real. According to the yoga tradition, our essential nature is like bliss, a basic joyfulness whose most essential activity is blessing, that we learn by repetitively recognizing, receiving, and bestowing the value of sacredness on our experience. In another way, we are liturgical. This means that we learn through worship. Because in modern times we've been educated on the erroneous model of being a thinking creature, we find ourselves in a meaning crisis. We've lost contact with what is inherently sacred, meaningful, and real. So we don't know what we should be doing because we have real difficulty intuiting what it is that we should care about. We're going to go into all this, and we're going to make the assertion that the yoga tradition offers a really systematic way to meet these problems, because it understands our essential nature and it stewards our formation and our education with an ecology of practices that nourish us at each level of our being. So we hope you stay with us to delve more deeply into this topic and to find out how yoga offers something that is badly needed in the modern world, how it can educate people of all beliefs people from all cultures and places, from all socioeconomic levels, because it assumes that we all share this essential nature and that we need to remember and represent this in the way that we act, in the way that we relate and move about in the world. Oh, God bless everyone. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Lost Ways of Knowing podcast. We hope it was informative and also inspiring for you. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and leave a review for us so other yoga teachers and practitioners can find us. For in-person opportunities to learn and grow in a community setting, visit circleyogashala.com.